In the heart of Atlanta stood the sprawling Blackwood estate, a mansion so grand it seemed untouchable, just like its owner, David Blackwood, a billionaire who had built an empire of steel and finance. To the outside world, David had everything: wealth, respect, and influence. But behind the polished marble walls lay an emptiness that even billions could not fill. His beloved wife had passed away years earlier, leaving him to raise their only daughter, 7-year-old Emma, all alone. Though David provided Emma with every luxury imaginable, he knew deep inside that money could not replace a mother's love. The little girl's quiet questions, "Daddy, will I ever have a mommy again?" haunted him late at night. One evening, after weeks of torment and advice from well-meaning friends, David made a decision as dramatic as it was controversial. He would not pick a wife for himself. Instead, he would allow Emma to choose her own mother. To make the process fair, David invited 5 wealthy, highly educated women from Atlanta's elite circle to his mansion: a sharp corporate lawyer, a respected doctor, a successful businesswoman, a glamorous socialite, and a famous architect. They were polished, powerful, and, in David's mind, potential role models for Emma. The news spread quickly, and society buzzed with curiosity over this unusual audition. But what none of the guests expected was that, among the crystal chandeliers and carefully prepared dinners, there was another woman already living inside the mansion: Kesha Williams, the black housekeeper who quietly swept the floors, served the meals, and tucked Emma into bed at night. To the 5 glamorous candidates, she was invisible, someone to be dismissed with a wave of the hand. To Emma, however, Kesha was the only one who whispered bedtime stories, baked butterfly-shaped cookies, and listened when she was sad. And while the elite women dressed in diamonds and designer gowns to impress David, Kesha wore a simple uniform and carried herself with dignity, unaware that she was about to become the center of a battle far greater than anyone could have imagined. The evening of the grand selection arrived, and the Blackwood mansion looked like a palace. Chandeliers glittered across the vast dining hall, silver cutlery sparkled under soft golden light, and the air was filled with the delicate aroma of roses and expensive perfume. The 5 wealthy women entered one by one, their gowns sweeping across the polished marble floors, their laughter sharp and practiced. Each came prepared to prove that she was not only sophisticated enough to stand beside a billionaire, but also worthy of being chosen as the new mother of Emma. They smiled sweetly at David, complimented the lavish decor, and bragged about their achievements, each trying to outshine the other. But beneath the glittering surface, arrogance lurked. The women quickly noticed Kesha, the black maid who served drinks and cleared plates in silence. With her simple uniform and modest presence, she became an easy target for their ridicule. The lawyer whispered loudly, "How fitting, a maid in a billionaire's mansion." The socialite smirked and added, "I hope she doesn't spill anything on my gown, it costs more than her yearly salary." The laughter that followed wasn't just cruel, it was cutting, echoing through the grand hall like a reminder of how the rich believed they could step on anyone beneath them. David, distracted by the formal introductions, barely noticed the insults at first. But Emma, sitting quietly at the end of the long table, saw everything. Her little eyes darkened as she watched these glamorous women mock the one person who had always been kind to her. Meanwhile, Kesha kept her head down, moving gracefully from one side of the table to the other, carrying trays with a quiet dignity that shamed the very people laughing at her. She didn't argue, didn't defend herself, didn't even let the bitterness touch her face, but inside, the humiliation stung like fire. To her, it was nothing new. Life had taught her that the world judged by skin, status, and wealth. What the women didn't know, however, was that every word of their mockery was planting a seed of rebellion in Emma's heart. And soon, that little girl would show them all that true worth isn't wrapped in silk gowns or measured in bank accounts. As the dinner progressed, David realized that the evening wasn't going the way he had imagined. Instead of displaying grace, compassion, or genuine warmth toward Emma, the 5 women competed like actors on a stage, each desperate to prove her superiority. Their smiles were shallow, their compliments rehearsed, and their attention rarely drifted toward the little girl who was supposed to be at the center of it all. To David, the realization stung. He had hoped to find a woman who could love Emma not just for her name or her inheritance, but for the little girl she was: fragile, curious, and still aching for a mother's embrace. Then, almost as if fate intervened, Emma pushed her plate away and spoke with a quiet defiance that silenced the room. "Daddy," she said, "if one of these women wants to be my mommy, she has to dance with me first." Her innocent demand startled everyone. The women exchanged surprised glances, their painted lips curling in disbelief. Dance? In their minds, the evening was supposed to be about elegance, charm, and perhaps subtle flattery of David. But a dance? That seemed far beneath their dignity. Yet none dared refuse the billionaire's daughter. One by one, the women rose, attempting to impress. The lawyer was the first, stiff and awkward. She stumbled through the waltz, her movements rigid as though she was in a courtroom rather than a ballroom. The doctor followed, graceful in posture but clearly more accustomed to boardrooms and hospitals than polished dance floors. The socialite, with her jeweled gown sparkling, tried to sway elegantly, but her vanity outshone her rhythm. The businesswoman focused on precision, counting her steps with robotic determination, while the architect twirled Emma with elaborate gestures that seemed designed more to attract David's attention than to make the child laugh. Through it all, Emma remained quiet, her little face betraying no joy, no sparkle of connection. To her, these women were like porcelain dolls, polished, perfect, but empty. She glanced over at Kesha, who stood humbly by the doorway, hands clasped, watching silently as the spectacle unfolded. For weeks, Kesha had been the one who danced with Emma in the kitchen late at night, their laughter echoing as they spun barefoot across the tiles. She remembered the songs Emma loved, the rhythm that made her giggle, the steps that made her feel safe and cherished. Emma's eyes lingered on Kesha, pleading silently as though asking the one question she couldn't voice, "Will you dance with me now?" The wealthy women noticed the glance and chuckled mockingly. "Surely you don't want the maid to dance, darling," one of them sneered, her voice dripping with sarcasm. But Emma's stubbornness grew. "Yes," she said firmly, "I want Kesha to dance with me." A hush fell across the grand hall. For the first time that evening, the power shifted away from the guests and landed squarely on the quiet maid who had been ridiculed moments before. Kesha froze, her heart pounding, caught between fear and duty. She was just a servant in their eyes, but to Emma, she was already so much more. And as David's gaze shifted toward her, curiosity flickering in his eyes, Kesha knew that this moment, this simple dance, would change everything. The room grew still, as though even the chandeliers stopped shimmering to witness what was about to unfold. Kesha hesitated, her hands trembling slightly as every pair of eyes turned toward her. She wasn't dressed in silk or sequins, no diamonds glittered at her neck, and no polished shoes carried her across marble floors. Instead, she wore her simple maid's uniform, her shoes scuffed from days of service, her hair tied neatly but plainly. To the wealthy women seated around the grand table, the idea of her dancing was laughable, an absurd intrusion into their carefully curated world of privilege. Their smirks returned, their whispers buzzing like venomous bees. "This will be amusing," one murmured. "A maid trying to waltz in front of a billionaire," another scoffed. But Emma tugged Kesha's hand with innocent certainty, her little eyes wide with trust. "Please," she whispered, "dance with me, like in the kitchen." That simple request dissolved the fear in Kesha's chest. She wasn't about to dance for these wealthy spectators, she was dancing for the child who saw her not as a maid, not as a servant, but as family. Taking a deep breath, Kesha led Emma to the center of the hall. At first, her movements were tentative, her steps small and cautious. A soft hush fell over the guests, some suppressing laughter, others leaning forward to catch every mistake. But then something extraordinary happened. As the music swelled, so did Kesha's confidence. Her body remembered what her heart had long buried: the years of training, the competitions, the applause, the medals she had once earned before life's hardships forced her to trade dreams for survival. Her steps became fluid, her posture regal, her arms elegant as she guided Emma with the grace of a true dancer. The awkward maid the guests expected vanished, replaced by a woman whose every motion radiated strength, poise, and beauty. Emma giggled as Kesha twirled her gently, her tiny shoes clicking across the polished floor. The sound of her laughter filled the hall, echoing louder than the judgmental whispers that had filled it moments ago. David's eyes widened in astonishment. He had never seen Kesha like this. To him, she had always been a quiet presence in the background, reliable, humble, unassuming. But now, under the golden glow of the chandelier, she was transformed into something breathtaking. Every turn, every graceful sway revealed not just her skill but her soul, the dignity that no ridicule could erase, the strength that hardship could not break, and the hidden truth that wealth could never buy. The five women sat frozen, their smirks fading into disbelief. Their carefully curated images, their expensive gowns, and their polished facades suddenly felt shallow in the presence of such raw authenticity. For the first time, they weren't the stars of the evening, a maid was. And no amount of money, beauty, or status could outshine the honesty of the bond unfolding before their eyes, a bond built on love, trust, and shared joy. As the dance drew to a close, Kesha lifted Emma into a final graceful spin, ending with a bow that seemed to command the very air in the room. The silence that followed wasn't mocking, it was stunned, reverent, and tinged with shame from those who had laughed earlier. Emma clung to Kesha's neck, smiling ear to ear, and whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear, "See, Daddy? She's the one." And in that moment, David's heart shifted. What had started as an innocent child's test had turned into a revelation. The maid they mocked was no longer just a servant in his mansion, she was the only one who had shown Emma the love and joy that none of the so-called perfect women could ever give. The applause didn't come, not because the dance hadn't deserved it, but because no one had the courage to clap. The room remained unnervingly silent, like the air itself had thickened with tension. The 5 women sat stiffly, their faces frozen with disbelief and a creeping panic that slithered just beneath their perfect skin. The performance they had just witnessed wasn't just a dance, it was a humiliation. A public defeat, made even more bitter by the fact that it had come from the one person they had deemed invisible, expendable, and inferior. Victoria Ashworth's jaw clenched, her perfectly glossed lips twitching as she tried to mask the growing fury behind her poised expression. She turned to the others, whispering behind her champagne flute. "We need to do something about her. Now." The rest nodded subtly. What had started as casual disdain had now turned into a real threat. Kesha's elegance, her quiet power, her bond with Emma, it was all beginning to eclipse their every effort. And worse, David had noticed. He hadn't taken his eyes off Kesha since the final spin. That night, the women gathered in Priscilla Montgomery's private suite, the plush surroundings ironically suffocating in their conspiratorial silence. The air crackled with resentment. "She's winning," Christina snapped, pacing in her stilettos. "This isn't just about impressing a child anymore, David is watching her like she's made of gold." Priscilla, the always composed lawyer, poured herself a drink, the clink of ice in the crystal glass louder than their whispered plans. "She's clever. Quiet. She's playing the long game. But she's still just staff, and staff can be removed." But not without reason, Rebecca interjected, her voice low and cold. "David isn't stupid. He's sentimental, yes, but he's also calculated. We need to give him reasons to question her judgment. Her boundaries." The plan began to take shape, one poisonous thread at a time. They would stage small incidents, just enough to make Kesha appear inappropriate. Too familiar. Unprofessional. Emotional manipulation cloaked in maternal care. The kind of behavior a billionaire father might interpret as dangerous if framed the right way. They didn't need to destroy her, they just needed to raise enough doubt. The seeds of suspicion, once planted, would grow quickly in a house already haunted by trauma and fragile trust. But what none of them saw, blinded by privilege and entitlement, was that Kesha already knew the game they were playing. She had heard their whispers before, in different mansions, from different lips. Their tactics hadn't changed, only the scenery had. She had lived her entire life understanding that to many, her kindness would be seen as a threat, her presence as a disruption, her intelligence as a danger that needed to be masked. So she didn't retaliate. Not yet. Instead, she listened. She watched. She made mental notes of every sideways glance, every muttered insult, every backhanded compliment and orchestrated mishap. She understood their strategy, death by 1,000 cuts. But what they didn't understand was that she had already survived worse. The next day, the sabotage began. A misplaced silver tray. A forgotten ingredient in Emma's lunch. A tearful lie whispered by Victoria to David, "I just feel that Kesha might be too involved." "It's concerning." David listened, but he didn't respond. Not right away. Inside, he was torn. He couldn't deny the sudden uptick in strange occurrences around the house. But every time he looked at Kesha, calm, kind, steady, he questioned whether he was being manipulated, or if someone else was pulling strings. What the women didn't know was that David had already installed new surveillance systems throughout the house. After Emma's nightmares had returned, he couldn't ignore his instincts. And now, as he watched the footage late into the night, what he saw chilled him. The truth was beginning to unfurl: subtle acts of sabotage, small conspiracies, cruel whispers, all aimed at one woman who had done nothing but care. And just like that, the war had silently begun. Not a war of fists or shouting matches, but a psychological chess game where every move mattered. The 5 women had declared themselves enemies. But Kesha, underestimated and overlooked, was quietly building her counterattack, with grace, with patience, and with the truth. She didn't need to destroy them. All she had to do was let them keep digging. And when the time came, the whole world would see who they really were beneath the diamonds and deception. Days passed, and the tension inside the Blackwood mansion thickened like a storm cloud ready to burst. Emma, though still young, wasn't blind to the shift in energy. She could feel the way the women's laughter sounded less genuine, more venomous. She noticed the way they whispered to her father when Kesha wasn't around, planting seeds of doubt in every conversation. Yet, the little girl's heart remained steadfast. She knew who loved her, and no rumor or manipulation could erase the truth of Kesha's kindness. One evening, the drama reached its breaking point. The mansion was buzzing with yet another dinner gathering, this time grander than before. Guests from across the city had been invited: business associates, family friends, and even members of the media. The women knew this was their chance. If they could publicly expose Kesha as unworthy, as a fraud or an opportunist, David would have no choice but to remove her from his life and his daughter's. As the guests mingled, laughter and classical music filled the hall, but beneath it all lay the tension of a brewing trap. Victoria, always the ringleader, whispered to Christina, "Tonight's the night. Watch this." She discreetly gave a signal to the butler, who placed a wine glass with a hidden crack in front of Kesha's serving tray. Moments later, the glass shattered dramatically across the polished floor, crimson liquid splattering near David's shoes. Gasps echoed through the room. "How careless!" Priscilla hissed loudly, making sure the guests heard her. Imagine if Emma had been nearby. What kind of maid puts a child in danger like that? All eyes turned to Kesha, who stood frozen, holding her tray with composure, her face unreadable. For a moment, it seemed the women's plan was working. Murmurs spread through the guests, eyebrows raised, doubt sparking in the air. But then, Emma's small voice cut through the noise like a bell. "She didn't do it." The room fell silent. The little girl stood on her chair, her tiny hands clenched into fists, her eyes blazing with a fire far too fierce for her age. "It wasn't her. I saw them, they're the ones lying." She pointed directly at Victoria and Christina, her voice shaking but strong. "They keep trying to make Kesha look bad because they're jealous. But she's the only one who cares about me. She's the only one who's ever been kind." The hall erupted in chaos. Guests turned their heads, whispers surged like waves, and David's eyes narrowed as he replayed the accusations in his mind. But unlike the others, David had more than his daughter's word. Quietly, he stood, raised his hand for silence, and gestured toward the large screen that had been set up in the hall for the evening's entertainment. "If that is the truth," he said, his voice steady and commanding, "then we should let the evidence speak for itself." The room darkened, and suddenly, footage from the hidden cameras flickered onto the screen. At first, the guests were confused. Why was surveillance being shown at a dinner? But then the truth revealed itself in brutal clarity. The video displayed the women, one by one, whispering in corners, exchanging looks, deliberately setting up accidents to frame Kesha. The broken glass, the misplaced items, the lies, it was all there, caught in crisp detail for every pair of shocked eyes to see. Gasps filled the room. One guest muttered, "Unbelievable," another whispered, "So much cruelty, for what?" The 5 women's faces turned pale, their carefully constructed masks crumbling before the very audience they had hoped to impress. David's voice, cold and unyielding, cut through the silence. "I invited you here tonight to find someone worthy of standing beside my daughter. But what I've seen instead is arrogance, manipulation, and cruelty. You mocked someone who showed nothing but grace. You targeted the very person who has been the heart of this household. And now the world sees you for who you truly are." The women tried to protest, Victoria stammered, Christina pleaded, but the room was no longer theirs to control.
The audience's judgment had already fallen.
Whispers turned to disgust, disgust turned to condemnation, and soon, the 5 women found themselves surrounded not by admiration, but by shame. Kesha, still standing silently in her modest uniform, didn't gloat.
She didn't smirk or celebrate.
She simply bowed her head, her dignity intact, her strength unshaken. Emma rushed to her side, hugging her tightly, her little voice filled with relief.
"I told you, Papa, she's the one who truly loves me." In that moment, the tables had turned completely. The women who had entered the mansion dripping in diamonds left that night with their reputations in ruins. And Kesha, the one they had mocked, ridiculed, and tried to destroy, had emerged as the quiet victor, not because she fought back with malice, but because truth had fought for her. The night ended with a lesson none of the guests would ever forget: dignity cannot be stolen, cruelty cannot hide forever, and respect belongs not to those with wealth, but to those with integrity. The night of revelations had changed everything. The grand hall, once filled with laughter, music, and the arrogant chatter of the wealthy, now carried an air of solemn reflection. The guests had witnessed something rare: the stripping away of pretense, the unmasking of cruelty, and the triumph of truth. As the last whispers about the scandal faded, everyone's eyes turned not to the disgraced women, but to Kesha, who stood quietly beside little Emma, her head bowed in humility. David Blackwood, a man known for his sharp business instincts and ruthless decisions in the corporate world, felt something stir within him that no financial victory had ever brought. For years, he had believed that wealth was the true measure of worth, that people could be weighed and judged by their titles, their possessions, and their status. But tonight, in the silence that followed the truth, he realized how wrong he had been. The women he thought could be suitable influences for his daughter had proven empty, shallow, and cruel, while the woman he had overlooked, the one who was mocked for being just a maid, had shown more grace, courage, and love than all of them combined. David walked over to Kesha, his face stern but his voice softer than it had ever been in public. "Kesha," he said, the room hanging on his every word, "you have endured humiliation, deceit, and cruelty not with retaliation, but with dignity. Tonight, you reminded me and everyone here that true character has nothing to do with wealth or status. You have cared for Emma not because it was your job, but because it was in your heart. And for that, you have my deepest respect." A murmur of agreement rippled through the audience. Even the most hardened businessmen, the most judgmental socialites, found themselves nodding, their arrogance tempered by the undeniable lesson unfolding before their eyes. Kesha looked up, her eyes shimmering, though she fought back tears. "I never wanted recognition," she replied softly. "All I wanted was to do what was right, to make sure Emma grew up surrounded by love, not cruelty. That's all." Emma, unable to contain her emotions, hugged Kesha tightly and spoke in her innocent but powerful voice, "I don't need anyone else. I just need her. She's family to me." Her words struck deeper than any speech could, disarming even the coldest hearts in the room. For the first time that night, the applause wasn't for wealth, beauty, or status, it was for love, loyalty, and truth. The 5 women, now disgraced, slipped away from the mansion, their jewels and gowns doing little to mask the humiliation etched on their faces. They had entered seeking admiration, but left carrying the weight of shame. The crowd's eyes no longer followed them, they were forgotten, dismissed as a painful reminder of what arrogance leads to. But Kesha's image, the maid who stood with dignity, the caretaker who shielded a child with love, the woman who never allowed bitterness to taint her character, lingered in every guest's mind long after the night ended. She had unknowingly become a symbol, a living reminder that respect is earned not by money, but by actions. David later addressed his guests one final time, his voice steady, resonant with newfound humility. "Let tonight be remembered not for scandal, but for truth. Wealth can buy luxury, but it cannot buy integrity. Status can command fear, but it cannot command respect. And appearances may deceive, but character will always reveal itself in time. The greatest mistake we make is judging others too quickly, and tonight, I have learned that lesson more clearly than ever." The guests departed with heavy thoughts, many of them questioning their own lives, their own treatment of those they considered beneath them. The story of what had happened inside the Blackwood mansion spread across the city like wildfire. Some retold it as a scandal, others as a cautionary tale, but for those who had been present, it was nothing less than a transformation. And for Emma, the little girl whose love had exposed the truth,
her bond with Kesha only grew stronger. She no longer saw her as a maid but as a mother figure, a protector, and a role model who taught her the most valuable lesson of all, that the heart of a person is worth more than all the riches in the world. The moral of the story became clear to all: never underestimate, never mock, and never belittle someone based on their position, their race, or their background. True greatness lies in kindness, humility, and integrity. Those who build their lives on arrogance may shine for a moment, but only those with pure hearts will shine forever. The mansion lights dimmed, but the lesson of that night continued to glow, a reminder that respect, once lost, is hard to regain, and that love, once given, has the power to change everything.